Okay, Unit 3, Lecture 4, we're going to be discussing the Marshall Court, Supreme Court, which is established in the Judiciary Act of 1789. John Marshall is going to be Chief Justice for 34 years. He'll be appointed to that position by John Adams just before he leaves the presidency. Marshall is a Federalist from Virginia, so Marshall then believes in a strong national government, and many of his cases will work on strengthening the national government, all right, or establishing or solidifying its powers and its supremacy. And he'll also be very influential in making the Supreme Court a co-equal branch of government and establishing its power, specifically the power of judicial review, which we'll discuss in a second. There's three main cases from the Marshall Court that you have to know or be familiar with, and we're going to briefly touch on them today. All right, we're going to do an activity in class regarding them all. Yay. All right, the first case you need to know is Marbury versus Madison, and this has to do with judicial appointments by John Adams also, and Jefferson trying not to allow those people to have jobs. The big part of it, or what we need to know, is that in Marbury versus Madison, the Marshall Court declares a federal law unconstitutional. This sets a precedent. If they can declare a law unconstitutional once, they've established they have that power. They can do it further on down the road whenever they see the need. This power, which we call judicial review, determining the constitutionality of both laws and or executive acts, is the Supreme Court's main check on both the legislative branch and the executive branch. Okay, so Marbury versus Madison, you're going to remember judicial review, constitutionality, and check on the other branches. The second case you have to know is Mcculloch versus Maryland, and this has to do with the Second Bank of the U.S. Congress recharters a new bank in 1816 with much wider support. Democratic Republicans now support the bus, and this case is going to do much to reinforce the doctrine of implied powers. Okay, so 1816, Congress recharters the bus. In 1818, Maryland is going to pass a law taxing the bus. The cashier for the bus in Baltimore refuses to pay that tax, and the case winds up in front of the Supreme Court. Remember, the Supreme Court is the last court of appeal. So the Supreme Court doesn't just pull things out of the air saying we want to talk about this. It has to make its way up through the judiciary. All right. Two things they determine in the Mcculloch case, or two questions they respond to. One, does the Congress have the power to establish a bank in the first place? And two, did Maryland's law unconstitutionally interfere with congressional power? The state's attempt to overshadow, say, a federal law. Okay. So in a unanimous decision, the court decides, yes, Congress has the authority to establish a bank, a bus. This reinforces implied powers. Okay, this means, and Marshall is clear about this, that the federal government has more powers than are explicitly written in the Constitution. Okay, so implied powers. Marshall also made it clear that since the Constitution clearly states the federal government is supreme and the Constitution is supreme, the states cannot tax institutions of the federal government and interfere with federal business. That means the Maryland law is unconstitutional. They've now expanded their power of judicial review to include state laws. So the judicial branch can declare federal and state laws unconstitutional. Okay, very important. Next case you're going to hear or look at is Gibbons versus Ogden, and Gibbons versus Ogden has to do with interstate trade, ferries going from New York to New Jersey. All right, New York had tried to give somebody a monopoly on it. The federal court, the Supreme Court decides, and Marshall makes it clear that only the national government has power over interstate commerce that crosses state lines. So this reinforces a power that was explicitly given to the federal government in the Constitution because of its weaknesses in the articles. So remember, judicial review, all right, interstate commerce, and implied powers all are reinforced through the Marshall Court. Thank you.